Yo, what's going on YouTube? My name's SoFlo Sneakers, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over everything you need to know to successfully bot Yeezy Supply. So I'm going to be breaking down the basics, and I'm going to be going over every single aspect of this site, so even if you don't know a thing about Yeezy Supply right now, you should have a very good understanding by the end of the video. The four main sections this video is going to consist of is going to be the site overview, Gmails, proxies, and then profiles, and I'm going to be leaving timestamps on the video, so if you want to skip ahead to a specific section, feel free to do so now. Also, for anyone who doesn't know, I do own my own cook group called SoFlo Supply, and we've really been helping with taking members reselling / botting game to the next level. So if you're interested in learning more, make sure to check out my website down in the description below. Lastly, if this video provided you value in any way whatsoever, make sure to drop a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more future content. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video, and on that note, let's get into it. Welcome to the first section of the video, which is going to be the Yeezy Supply general overview. Real quick guys, instead of saying Yeezy Supply the entire video, I'm occasionally going to abbreviate it with YS, so whenever I say YS, I just mean Yeezy Supply. As you guys can see on screen now, I'm on Yeezy Supply's site, and you can see that we have a countdown timer for 2 days, 7 hours, 44 minutes, and 23 seconds. The timer is currently counting down to Yeezy Day, which is going to be August 2nd, and this is definitely going to be one of the biggest days of the year. For a quick rundown, Yeezy Day is basically an entire day where Yeezy Supply and Adidas are going to be restocking a bunch of old and super profitable Yeezy colorways back to back to back, which should honestly be pretty insane this year. The timer is counting down to 9 a.m. Eastern, which is the typical time that Yeezy Supply drops at. Last year they used to drop at 10 a.m. Eastern, but for whatever reason they switched it to 9, and it's been that way ever since. In order to be able to successfully bot Yeezy Supply, you first need to understand exactly how the site works. Yeezy Supply is a demandware site, and they use a queue system when releasing shoes. Other common names for the queue system is the splash page or the waiting room, but just know that all three of these are exactly the same. At the time of the drop, you're put into the waiting room or the queue system, and you're essentially just waiting your turn to get through the queue so you can go and try to check out. On most Yeezy Supply drops, the waiting room actually opens up 15 minutes before the drop, so if the drop is at 9, the waiting room is going to open up at 8:45. One very important thing that we want to keep in mind when botting YS is that we almost never want to start our tasks right when the waiting room goes live. The reason for this is because in this 15-minute waiting room, nobody's getting through the queue, nobody's able to check out, and everyone's just basically sitting there. What we're waiting for is when the sale actually goes live, which typically happens shortly after 9 a.m. Eastern, mainly around 9:02 or 9:03. After the sale goes live is when Yeezy Supply is actually letting people get through the queue and allowing people to check out. So just a quick recap, the waiting room on YS is going to go live around 8:45 a.m. EST, but the actual sale isn't going to go live until about 9:02 or 9:03. And when the sale actually goes live is when we're going to want to start our tasks on our bot. Keep in mind that some bots will tell you to start slightly before the sale goes live at 9 or 9:01, and if this is the case, they will more than likely make an announcement to do so you really don't have to worry about anything there. Another very important thing to keep in mind is that the queue system on Yeezy Supply isn't necessarily random, and there's a reason why some people are able to get through quicker and more often than others. Yeezy Supply's queue system relies on something called a V3 CAPTCHA trust score. I'm sure all of you guys know about the normal CAPTCHAs where you have to click the fire hydrants or the crosswalks, and this type of CAPTCHA where you actually have to solve it is called a V2 CAPTCHA. Like mentioned, Yeezy Supply uses a CAPTCHA called a V3 CAPTCHA, and you actually don't have to solve this one at all. V3 CAPTCHAs rely on something called a trust score, which is ranked 0.1 to 0.9, with 0.9 being the best, and this is exactly what we're looking for. I'm going to talk more about this in the Gmail section of the video, but just know that if you have a high enough trust score, Yeezy Supply is going to determine that you are in fact a real human being, and they're going to allow you to pass the queue so you can go and try to check out. The next point I want to run through is going to be tasks. The easiest way to think about what a task is it's basically just a browser like Chrome that's going onto the specified site. So if I'm running 10 tasks in my bot for Yeezy Supply, I basically have 10 Chrome browsers going onto Yeezy Supply's site and sitting in the queue and waiting to get through. In most cases, the more tasks you run, the better chance you have of copying, but this isn't always necessarily the case with Yeezy Supply. You need to make sure that the tasks you're running have a high enough V3 CAPTCHA score in order to make it through the queue, and the way that we do this is by having a ton of Gmail accounts. Before we get into the Gmail section of the video, there's two more quick points that I wanted to go over. The first thing is the SKU in the product link, and as you can see on screen now, the SKU is going to be these 6 letters and numbers at the end of the link, and this is typically what you're going to want to insert into your bot. Keep in mind that some bots will have you insert the entire product link instead of just the SKU, so that's just something else that you want to keep in mind. The second thing is that I'm going to be using Wrath to just kind of guide through everything in the tutorial, because most bots are going to be relatively the same when setting up for a Yeezy Supply drop. So just to do a quick recap of the Yeezy Supply overview, the waiting room goes up at 8:45 a.m. EST, and the sale goes live around 9:02 to 9:03. We want to start running our tasks when the sale goes live, or possibly a minute or two earlier depending on your bot. Each task is essentially just one browser that is going onto the site, sitting in the queue, and then trying to check out if it can get through. YS uses a queue system also known as the splash page or waiting room when they are releasing shoes. In order to get through the queue system, you need a high enough V3 capture trust score to let Yeezy Supply know you are a real human. In order to get a high enough V3 trust score, we are going to need to use Gmail accounts, which is going to bring us right into the next section of the video. Gmails are by far the most important part of botting Yeezy Supply because these are what allow us to get through the queue and be able to check out. To make things as simple as possible to understand, Google basically owns the entire reCAPTCHA service, which includes the V2 CAPTCHA, which is the one that you have to solve yourself, and the V3 CAPTCHA, which is what Yeezy Supply uses and you don't need to solve. Gmail accounts are all given a trust score, and if it's an older account, if you generate a lot of activity on it, like sending emails or watching YouTube a lot, you more than likely have a very high trust score. So once again, in order to be able to get through the queue on Yeezy Supply, you need to be using a Gmail that has a high enough trust score to show that you are a real human. Because Google owns reCAPTCHA, only Gmail is going to work, so no Yahoos, no Outlooks, or anything like that. If you're newer to the botting scene, I know what I'm saying probably is not making too much sense at all, and if that's the case, I highly recommend that you go check out my video on Gmails because I break down everything super clearly and it's super easy for beginners to understand. Like mentioned, Gmails are so important when botting Yeezy Supply, so understanding how they work and understanding how their trust scores work are vital to your success. I'll leave a link down to that video in the description below, so make sure to check that out if you have any confusion on Gmails or how their trust scores work. Another very important aspect that I also talk about in the Gmail video is going to be farming. Farming is basically just creating human-like activity on your Gmail accounts so they become more trusted by Google, hence giving you a higher trust score. I really can't stress enough how important Gmails and farming are when botting Yeezy Supply, so I highly recommend you guys go check out that video if you have any questions whatsoever. From this point on in the video, I'm going to assume that everyone knows how to farm and everyone knows how Gmail scores work. One of the biggest factors that is overlooked by so many people is the proxy that you're farming your Gmail with and using in your CAPTCHA harvesters. I personally believe that having a high quality Gmail is only half the battle, and having a high quality proxy that it's being farmed on is the other half. Along with Gmail activity, Gmail age, and other factors that determine your V3 score, your Gmail proxy is going to have a very major impact in this score as well. Something to keep in mind is that the proxy you're farming your Gmail with is going to be completely separate than the tasks you're running in your bot. If we hop into the CAPTCHA harvester section of Wrath, we can see that right here is where we can insert our proxy, and then if we click on the YouTube play button, that's where we'll be able to sign into our Gmail account. You always want your Gmail to stay consistent with the IP it's being farmed on, so if you're farming your Gmail on a specific proxy, you always want to be using that same exact proxy within the CAPTCHA harvester in your bot. One random tip is that if you have a personal Gmail or maybe a school Gmail that you're using on your home IP address, you can sign into your harvester with no proxy and be able to use that Gmail on the drop. Keep in mind that you should really only be doing this with one Gmail, as it is highly recommended to not run multiple harvesters on your local IP. Every Gmail and harvester that you're using in your bot should be unique, so you should never be using the same Gmail or the same CAPTCHA proxy twice, and you also don't want to be running the same Gmails or the same CAPTCHA proxies at the same time when running two different bots. I know a lot of people watching this video are probably looking for recommendations on what Gmails and what CAPTCHA proxies to buy. To be honest with you guys, most of the Gmails that I have are actually homemade Gmails, and yes, this is definitely the cheapest route to go, but these Gmails do take time to farm up, and a lot of these Gmails took me months and months of farming to actually have a very good trust score in order to pass the splash page on Yeezy Supply. You can always buy Gmails for super cheap on various sites, but if you guys are looking for something that is pre-farmed and ready to go for Yeezy Supply, I would definitely check out Vanished.io because they do have some pretty high quality stuff. Two of the proxy companies that I personally use to farm my Gmails with are Oculus and Ping, if you guys want to check them out as well. Major disclaimer for both the Gmails and the proxies, just because I'm having success with them guys does not in any way guarantee that you're gonna have the same success success. So please guys, do some of your own research, do some of your own testing, and figure out what's going to work best for yourself. Another super fire tip that I'd like to give everyone is the fact that you can farm your Gmails on any DC/ISPs that you might have bought for other sites. So for example, if I bought 50 ISPs specifically to run them on foot sites, there's absolutely no reason why I can't be using these same ISPs to farm my Gmails with. The one real downside to this is that more than likely your proxy list is occasionally going to get swapped out, and like I mentioned earlier, it is always best to keep your Gmail on the same IP address, but usually this isn't going to have too big of an effect to make a difference, and your Gmails will most likely be back to normal in a week or so. The next thing I want to talk about with Gmails is the Gmail to task ratio that you should be running in your bot. First off, this is going to vary from bot to bot, so you definitely want to take a look and see what your specific bot recommends. A safe rule of thumb that you can kind of go by if you're not 100% sure is anywhere from 50 to 100 tasks per one Gmail that you're running, but once again, some bots might say to run less, some bots might say to run more, so this is definitely something that you want to keep your eye on. The last point that I want to make on Gmails is the fact that they will burn out after a drop. What I mean by this is that if Google sees your Gmail solving a V3 CAPTCHA over and over and over the entire drop, they are definitely going to lower your score temporarily. A little rule of thumb that I personally found is that my Gmails take anywhere from a couple days to a week to be able to fully recover to the score they were previously at before the drop. Now we're going to go ahead and do a quick recap of the Gmail section. So to start off, the proxy that you're farming your Gmail on is just as important as the Gmail itself. You can run one local Gmail account with no proxy if that's something you wish to do. You do not want to be reusing the same Gmail in two different CAPTCHA harvesters on the same drop. Very importantly, you need to be doing your own research to see which Gmail and which proxies are going to do well for your specific setup. A common rule of thumb is you should be running 50 to 100 tasks per one Gmail, but you want to be listening to your bot because this definitely could be different. Your Gmails will most likely be burnt out after a drop, and you're going to have to give them a few days to a week to be able to recover. That just about wraps up the Gmail section of the video, so the next section we're going to move on to is going to be proxies. The two main proxies that are going to be ran on YS are going to be ISP/DCs and residentials. I'm going to say right off the bat that I personally rarely ever run ISPs on Yeezy Supply, and I've mainly been sticking to residentials. After Yeezy Supply's most recent firewall update a couple months ago, they've really been cracking down pretty hard on ISPs and DCs. I've personally had it where my ISPs were working fantastic on one drop, and then the next drop they were working good, and then out of nowhere, completely banned. I personally no longer go out of my way to specifically buy ISPs for Yeezy Supply, but if I buy them for foot sites or Shopify, then of course I'm going to be running them on Yeezy Supply as well, assuming that they don't get banned. Of course guys, this is my opinion and this is what I do with it, but some people absolutely kill it with ISPs, some people don't, some people absolutely kill it with residentials and others don't, and once again guys, this is definitely going to vary from person to person, so you have to test and you have to see what's going to work the best for you. Like I said, I do run the high majority of my tasks on residential proxies. Quite honestly, there is a ton of residential providers that work just fine on Yeezy Supply, and they really aren't too strict when it comes to resis, at least in my experience. Once again guys, you're gonna have to experiment, try out a couple different providers and see which ones cart the best, see which ones check out the best, see which ones pass splash the best, and all that good stuff, and really just do some extensive testing on your own, because that is going to be the absolute best way that you're gonna improve and lock down your setup. Another thing that I'll say is you don't want to be spending $20+ per gigabyte on residentials. There are a ton of providers out on the market for less than $10 that will do the trick just fine. The next point I want to talk about with proxies on YS is going to be data consumption. Unlike some other sites like foot sites, residentials really don't get eaten up too fast when running them on Yeezy Supply. It's hard to give an exact number on how much data you're really going to use up, but for a rough estimate, you should be able to run about 1,000 tasks for one drop using 5 gigabytes or less. I always tend to get a little more data than I think I need, and I'm always keeping a pretty close watch on my data during the drop, because the last thing you want is for your proxies to completely die during the drop and then you have to start all over again. The last point I want to talk about with proxies is the issue of actually not being able to check out once you pass the splash page. If your Gmails are good and you're flying past the splash page, but for one reason or another you can't seem to cart or check out, this more than likely has to do with the proxies that you're running your tasks on. There's really not too much of a fix for this besides trying to generate a new list or trying to experiment with other providers to see if they have a better cart/checkout rate. This brings us into the last section of the video, which is going to be profiles. For this section, I'm just going to pull up the profile creator in Wrath, and I'm basically just going to run through all the different fields there. So for the first section, we have our name. When I'm running VCCs or virtual credit cards, I tend to use random names, and I think that's what most people tend to do as well. For the phone number, all I really do is match the zip code, and then the rest of the phone number is random. For the email, you can use anything from a Gmail to an Outlook to a Yahoo, and you can also use a catch-all, as those work very good as well. I personally use a catch-all from Google, and I've really never had an issue using it. Jigging your address on Yeezy Supply is honestly very simple, and let's just say my address is 123 Main Street. All I really do is just a small line 2 jig. So in address 2, I would do like room 1, or I could do room.1, apartment 1, can't spell, apartment 1, floor 1, and the list goes on and on and on. Unit 1, whatever it is, just throw something in line 2, and that's really all I do for Yeezy Supply. I don't do any 3-letter jigs, I don't do anything like that, and I've really never had an issue getting multiples delivered. Zip code, obviously fill out the right zip code, fill out the right city, fill out the right state, and fill out the right country. And for me, I personally use the same billing and shipping address just because I've seen better success with this. But if you aren't able to do this, you still should be able to use a separate billing and shipping address on Yeezy Supply because they really are not too strict with the profiles. For every profile that you make, there's 4 things that you want to be unique in each one. The first is going to be the phone number, the second is going to be the email, the third is going to be the address jig, and the fourth is going to be the card that you're using. You want all 4 of these things to be different on every profile that you make, and that's really going to be your best bet for avoiding declines on Yeezy Supply. The next section of the profile that we're going to be talking about is going to be our cards. Both hard cards and virtual credit cards should work fine on Yeezy Supply, although results are going to vary from person to person. To be honest, there isn't many cards that really don't work on Yeezy Supply, and just to give a quick rundown of ones that I personally use and ones that do work, Privacy works good, Amex works, Eno works, Stripe works, and the list kind of goes on. But once again guys, this really is going to vary from person to person because I run Eno just fine on Yeezy Supply, but I talk to other people who just have a ton of declines and they just can't check out with them. One important thing to keep in mind on Yeezy Supply is the fact that they implemented 3DS, which is basically just an additional form of verification from your bank. Some examples of cards that do have 3DS are going to be cards like Bank of America, Chase, Capital One, and I'm sure there's some others as well. Some cards that don't have 3DS are going to be cards like Privacy, Amex, and there's also a low-key provider that's been working really well called /VCCs. If you can prioritize cards without 3DS, that is definitely the way to go, but if you can't, you're basically just going to get a verification window where you have to text or email yourself a code and then insert the code, and then you should be good to go on the checkout. That pretty much wraps up the profile creation aspect of Yeezy Supply, but there are a few more points that I wanted to touch on. The first is the fact that Yeezy Supply really doesn't cancel. Unlike sites like Footsites or Shopify, Yeezy Supply really is lenient with the profiles, guys. If you keep those 4 things that I mentioned unique in your profiles, you really should not have any issues getting multiples. Another thing with YS is the fact that you're able to check out 2 to 3 times per profile with no cancels. The next point I want to talk about is going to be zip code bans. A zip code ban is basically when there's too many checkouts coming in from one specific zip code, so Yeezy Supply bans that zip code for the rest of the drop. One thing to keep in mind is that zip code bans will really only last for that one specific drop, so you should be good to go on the next. So if you're zip code banned on one drop, you technically should not be zip code banned on the next, but if you live in a very saturated zip code where people are just toasting Yeezy Supply, you might want to look into finding an address in another zip code. The last point I want to talk about for profiles is the fact that YS will straight up just decline you for what seems like absolutely no reason. I've had plenty of times where I've checked out on a profile on one drop, and then the next drop I'm getting declines and fraud declines and all these crazy stuff, and then the next drop I'm able to check out again. You can always try to adjust your profiles from drop to drop, but sometimes it really just seems like it's their payment processor declining you, and there's really not too much else you can do to make that order go through on that specific profile. Declines are honestly just part of the game on Yeezy Supply, and as long as the majority of your checkouts are going through, you really should be good to go. That was actually the last section of the video, but if you guys have any questions whatsoever, make sure to drop them down in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as possible. If you found value in today's video, make sure to give this video the thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more future content. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and on that note, I'll catch you all on the next one.